I'd like to call to order the City of Littleton City Council virtual study session, budget review for Wednesday, September 9th, 2020. It is 6 p.m. or 1800. All council members are present except for Councilmember Grove, who will be joining us a few minutes late. Tonight, we're going to have our part two of our budget review. And just a reminder, Thursday, September 24th is when we'll have our third session, and that will begin at 6 p.m. as well. Last night was a good night. We got a lot done. And I'll turn it over now to the city manager.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Good evening, council. Yeah, I just want to echo those comments from the mayor. I thought last night went really well. Appreciate your engagement with that, especially in this virtual setting, which I realize is a little more difficult, but again, thank you for that. So I think we left off, I believe, with the city clerk. And so I think I'm just going to turn it right over to Tiffany Hooten, and we'll go through several of our departments, and then the balance of the evening here we're going to spend on the capital project fund. So with that, Tiffany.
Thank you. Good evening, council. We'll go ahead and just jump right in and start with the city clerk. So kind of following last night, the way we ran the meeting last night, I'll just highlight some specific items for each department, and then we'll open it up for questions. So first this evening, we have the city clerk's office, and we don't have a policy question related to the city clerk's department. And we don't have any PBB highlights, but there are a couple of things that I did want to mention about their budget for 2021. If you look at their budget, you're going to see that there's an increase of about $40,000, and that's related to election costs. We do have an election in 2021, primarily for council members, and so we're required to share that cost with all three counties. It kind of helps on the price of that and keeps costs low so that we can share that election. And so we did add $40,000 related to the election in 2021. And then one other thing that I did just want to note is there's a decrease in one of their line items related to some small capital purchases that we had in 2020. We replaced and upgraded a number of iPads for some board members, and that was a one-time expense in 2020. So you're going to see a fairly large reduction for that department of about $6,470 because we're not going to need those replacements in 2021. The other thing is we did mention last night that the omnibus and shopping cart programs were both under the city clerk in previous years, and those were moved underneath the human resources department for 2021. So if you have any questions, we certainly have Colleen here who would be happy to answer any specific questions about the city clerk's office.
I see no questions.
I think Tiffany covered everything.
Great. Good job, Tiff.
All right. Well, we will go ahead and continue to the courts department. Again, for court, we don't have any policy questions this year. We do have a priority-based budgeting highlight that I did want to mention. The courts are doing a review of the domestic violence cases that they handle there in the court. And they're going to do a review of this program in 2021 and provide some additional analysis and information to council to determine if that program needs to change, if there's something we need to outsource, can we do it a little bit differently. And so we did provide a PBB highlight on that. And a couple of other highlights that I wanted to note was we do have an increase in software maintenance related to the court's software system. It's about a $14,000 increase, but one of the things that we did recently is we did increase the e-ticket surcharge that we charge on each ticket from $6.75 to $10 per ticket. And so the estimated revenue from that is going to offset that increased cost related to that software system. And then another program that we're kind of doing an analysis on right now, we're working on a cost of service study, is related to the defensive driving program. We realize that some of the fees may not be in line with the true cost of that program. And so we are in the middle of doing a cost of service study. And if we find that there's support to maybe change some of those fees related to that program, we will bring it back to council, hopefully on September 24th. And if not, then certainly before we ask council to review and make any changes to fees for 2021. So I believe we have Danielle and Sienna online. If either of you want to kind of touch on the domestic violence review that we're doing, and then maybe a little bit about the defensive driving program.
Perfect, I'd love to. So I'm Danielle Trujillo, the court administrator. And what we're doing with the domestic violence program is the justice stakeholders, which are the police department, the city attorney's office, and the municipal court, have decided to ask a capstone student, so we're working with the University of Colorado, Denver, to look at our current domestic violence level of service and evaluate whether or not it's something that we can continue to we can offer here at the city of Littleton. And we really need them to look at a perspective that approaches all three departments and looks at all the resources that we're providing to the community and whether or not it's something that we'd like to keep around at the city. So that partnership will go into effect at the starting of the school year. And then we should have a report by the end of May when the school year ends, when their program is done. So we're really excited about that. We've come up with questions together in order to really make sure that they're looking at it kind of with the entire city in mind. The other piece that we've looked at is the Littleton Defensive Driving School. It's a unique program that we offer here at the city. It's great that we have our own defensive driving school, but it is resource intensive for the court. And so we just wanted to evaluate whether or not we're looking at it and recuperating those administrative costs that go into it and really covering the cost of the instructors, the manuals, and keeping those instructors certified.
Great. Thank you, Danielle. Do we have any questions? I see none. Well, we have one from Councilmember Elrod.
Thank you, Danielle. So on the defensive driving, so is that something that is a program highlight that may be either an outsource or partnership or decrease service level, meaning remove that program? Where does this kind of fall into everything, Tiffany?
Yeah, I think it's really going to depend on what the outcome of the capstone review is as to which direction we go. But yes, I think there may be some outsourcing. There may be a need to eliminate that program, but that's what the capstone review is going to provide to us.
I'm sorry. So the capstone's for the defensive driving, or no?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. No, you're right. Sorry, I'm getting them mixed up. No. For the defensive driving, we're doing a study of the cost of providing that service. And so kind of the intention, I think, is to remain in-house, and Danielle, correct me if I'm wrong, but to maintain that service in-house, but make sure that we're recouping the cost of providing that service.
Okay, so it's still in the budget.
It is currently, yes. Yes. And if you recall, when we did the cost of service study in the past couple of years, we've gotten that model from that contract. And so we're utilizing it internally so that we can review other services that we provide in the city, so that we can, be defensive, no pun intended, on what fees we're going to be charging for some of our services.
You know what the cost of it is now, just roughly?
It's $30 per participant. And
us as a city.
And then in order to actually operate the class, it's roughly around $700.
Yeah. So it's probably obvious that we're not going to recoup 100%, but at least if we can mitigate some of those expenses to the city.
Great. Councilmember Milliman.
So I didn't know we had a defensive driving school. Can you share how many students per year you get? What types of students do you get? And are you in competition with some of the local private defensive driving schools?
Yeah, great questions. So we roughly have about 330 students a year that go through the Littleton Defensive Driving School. We have structured it a little bit different this calendar year. We actually took the class virtual, just like most of the other court-ordered classes. So we offer the class virtually. Our Littleton police officers actually teach the class. We offer two different types of classes. So we have drivers that are under 25 that really target those teenage drivers that have had speeding offenses or car accidents. And then we also then have a class for over 25 for our older drivers. It's the national certified class for defensive driving. So we use that manual and that certification. So our officers are certified instructors, just like most of those local places that we would send court-ordered defensive driving defendants to. So it's not really competition. What we like to think is we're providing the service here locally. Those people got tickets here. They're interacting with our officers who wrote the tickets. So it feels like it's really meant to serve our community members in a different way. The officers really like teaching those classes. We think they do a tremendous job. So that's why we really want to keep the service around. At the end of the day, though, we never really took into account the administrative fee, which is the court clerks doing the job. And so that's why I rose the question that we should really think about the cost of service. And so because Tiffany in Finance has used that study before, we felt comfortable that we could apply it to the Littleton Defensive Driving. So we've taken the last month to evaluate how much time it really takes us, what's the cost of performing the class. And then up to this point, it hasn't been a factor, but moving forward, we just don't want it to become a factor that it's costing the city a lot of money.
All right, thank you. We have the city manager, then Councilmember Driscoll.
Yeah, Council, I think I just want to acknowledge first of all, having Danielle Trujillo as our court administrator, relatively new role. I think for those who know her can realize pretty quick here, she's very analytical. And I think this has worked to our advantage in time, certainly with priority-based budgeting coming on about the same time. So she pointed out an example through the priority-based budgeting exercise that this is clearly something that we need to analyze. And we just haven't done that in the past. I think the domestic violence is another one. And I've had a couple of conversations with Judge Feldman, and I think it's fair to share from his perspective what he certainly shared with me, because I think he's just thrilled about some of the changes and some of the detail that we're looking at now. And I think that's largely really, honestly, Danielle's her coming on the job, and certainly in the city attorney's office. There's a great story to tell here about Reed and his staff interacting here. And I think we've raised the bar quite a bit at the court level here compared to the last few years.
Yeah, thank you. Councilmember Driscoll.
Yes, yeah, we've talked about sharing services with our neighbors, Inglewood, Sheridan, not so much Highlands Ranch, but is this a service that we could either offer our neighbors or team up with our neighbor so we can offset that cost? Just a comment, something to think about.
Currently, our classes had been at capacity pre-COVID, and then we've lowered the capacity because of virtual, and then the amount of our traffic tickets has gone down. So it is something that we could definitely offer to other localities. One great partner might be Columbine Valley. They already partner with us. They use our courthouse, so it could be easy to cycle them in and see if they'd be willing to do it. That's definitely a question that I would pose to the instructors that are currently running it.
Great. All right. Thank you, Danielle. All right. We have no more questions. Tiffany?
All right. We will move right along. Next, we have the police department. And I only allowed 30 minutes. So I'm going to ask Doug if he can at least keep it to an hour minimum. just because we know how he can get when it comes to talking about police. He's very passionate. But so a couple highlights related to the police department. You know, this is one of our largest departments, and reducing their budget or coming up with ideas on how to reduce it based on COVID and the loss of revenues is certainly a challenge for him. But I think they really rose to the occasion. You know, if you look at their line item budgets, there's a number of line items that they've reduced across the board. They looked at supplies of their special, they looked at learning and education, they looked at office supplies, and so there's a number of reductions in there. There are a couple that I did want to highlight. I did want to talk about the body-worn cameras. You know, this is a new state statute, a state law that was passed recently, and I believe we have until 2023 to implement that program, and 2023 to fully implement that. And no, and there's going to be significant cost to the city. As far as the cameras themselves, you know, we're going to certainly look towards grants. We envision there's going to be a number of grants coming forward related to this program, so we're absolutely going to move forward with those. The other part is, you know, there's going to be a request for personnel related to this program. There's going to be a need for someone to manage the video and ensure that proper video is released when it's requested. And then I mentioned the property and liability costs related to this program. So the only one that you're going to see in the 2021 budget is the property and liability portion, and that's about $200,000. The other portions related to personnel and the actual cameras and data management, we're looking at doing it partially in 2022 and then full implementation in 2023. So while you're not seeing the full ramifications of that program in 2021, we have plugged that into our 5-year plan, knowing that we're going to have to address that in the next couple of years. So I did just kind of want to highlight that for council this evening. And a couple of other line items that they reduced was related to out-of-state travel for officers. You know, if there's a need for them to travel, and it's duty related, you know, we kind of reduced that. And then again, learning and education, you know, we've reduced that across the board, but I think it's important to know that, you know, if there's any employees that have a certification requirement, you know, especially in the police department, anything like that, you know, that is first and foremost priority for the city. We want to make sure and ensure that employees are able to maintain those certifications. So that's why, you know, we still are requesting learning and education across the board. And then one thing, a budget highlight that we did have for the police department is there was a reclassification, and it's related to the patrol division. And I think, Chief, if you want to kind of talk about what you're doing in the patrol division related to that reclassification.
Tiffany and Chief, we have a couple questions. If we could go to our city attorney, then Council Member Elrod first.
Thank you, Mayor. I was just going to chime in and say that the BWCs, or body-worn cameras, take effect July 1st, 2023. But obviously there needs to be testing. It's going to take a while to get that into place. So there's going to need to be quite a bit of lead time as we get that program underway and get the staffing and kind of all the bugs worked out on it. Additionally, I know that Chief Stevens in Finance will be hoping for some sort of grants to come either on a state level or federal level. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. But at some point, we may just have to pull the trigger, no pun intended, on this one. Sooner rather than relying on grants.
Good.
That's all I have.
All right, Council Member Elrod.
You referred to 100,000 for insurance. What line item is that?
It's going to be in the general operations line item, and it's
looking at page 96. Is it somewhere in there? Or
it's going to be on page 139. So for property and liability insurance, we do an annual transfer from the general fund and a few of the other funds to help cover those costs. And in the past, it's been about 600,000, and we did increase it to 800,000 in 2021, specifically related to the body worn, or to the legal liability at the state level.
I see it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Chief.
So you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, I'm getting a little dizzy though. What are you doing?
Well, so Jennifer had to turn up the heat in her house. My wife won't let me turn on the heat in my house, so I'm in my car where I can have as much heat as I want.
There you go.
So yeah, I apologize. I had to pick up my son from baseball. So anyway, like Tiffany was talking about with some modifications we made in the patrol division for the police department, the main one is we reassigned the commander. We have 4 commanders in the police department. We had 2 commanders in patrol, one that covered day shift, and then one responsible nights, swing shift and graveyard shift. So he had 4 patrol teams. Given the situation we have now in our profession and the increased scrutiny we have for our operations, I felt it was prudent to reassign one of our commanders from support services and move him into patrol. So that allows us 3 commanders for patrol and one for each of the 2 shifts. So, or one for each shift in each 2 patrol teams. So it allows us to have a more thorough coverage of command level supervision for our patrol officers. It's one of the things that departments hear about when they are involved in critical incidents, about especially on that overnight shift where there's a lack of command level supervision historically. So we were able to do that, move some folks around and do it at without adding any personnel to the department. So we are creating the new sergeant's position, but we're offsetting that with the elimination of a patrol officer position. So overall cost for the department is approximately $30,000 per year on that position to allow us to provide that better coverage.
Great. Chief, can you address, and it's an annual question for you, on the overtime in each category?
Yeah, so actually overtime, probably because of COVID and the call load had decreased during COVID a little bit. So our overtime for 2020 at least has been below projections. So I think we're doing pretty well there. We are luckily fully staffed right now, which is great. That helps us reduce overtime. Previously, we were using overtime shifts to fill patrol teams to provide those critical services to the community. But currently, we're doing well. We have a full patrol staff, and we are able to do that with a minimum of overtime. We don't anticipate at this time going below authorized staffing. Our projections show we should be fine unless we have any unexpected retirements or folks leaving. So we anticipate that overtime would, barring some sort of crazy situation, we anticipate we should have minimal overtime.
Great. Minimal. Well, we're budgeting though in each category around 80,000.
Yes. Yep.
And that's normal. I mean, that's year after year we're doing that. So.
Yeah, that is correct.
Cool. All right. Thank you. And how much do you miss Chief Armstrong and able to attack the fire guys?
I'm still crying over that. It's sad and lonely without the fire department.
It's like Howard Cosell signing off.
It's just not the same picking on Public Works.
All right. Well, thank you, Chief. Thank you very much. Council, do we have any questions? I see none, Chief. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you.
Really appreciate all of you guys out there. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mayor.
All right, thank you. All right. Back to you, Tiffany.
All right. I was going to just mention too a recent grant for the co-responder program that we applied for the police department. It came to council the last couple of meetings, I believe. And so currently we do have the co-responder budget in the police department's line items. But if we do get that grant, we won't be spending that out of the general fund. So I just kind of wanted to make a note of that. So we're really hopeful that we're going to get that grant.
Is that the mental health issue?
It is, yes.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
And then, is that mostly on in the evenings or on weekends?
You know, I have to ask the chief, are you still there?
Yes. We run all different times of day and night. We have 2 different co-responders that work on the street with us 40 hours per week. And it's mixed up between days and nights and graveyard shift.
Good. Thank you. Appreciate it.
You bet.
All right.
All right, well, chief.
That's
you
like a
didn't
record.
even-
We need to mark our calendar.
I know. Yeah, make a note, asterisk. We need a big asterisk for that one.
There you go.
Well, next.
Hey, well, I think Keith is coming up. Keith is coming up, so stand by.
We got to put him in his car.
That's right.
All right, thank you, chief. Yeah, I was just going to mention we have Keith next, so certainly he'll make up for the extra time that we have available. I'm pretty certain of that.
Oh, nice. All right.
All right, so for Public Works, we do have 3 policy questions, but they're related to storm drainage and open space. So I'm going to hold those until September 24th. And so for the Public Works Department and the General Fund, we don't have any policy questions to discuss tonight, but I do have several PBB highlights and some just overall budget highlights that I want to touch on. So we do have a couple of programs that we included as PBB highlights, and they're on page 40 and page 45 if you're looking for that. And they're related to median and right-of-way landscape and maintenance, and then also street maintenance, paving of city streets. And some of the review that we did during PBB, these are a few programs that are in the PBB system. And I kind of wanted Keith to kind of touch on what he is doing with those programs currently and where he envisions them going forward. And they're under review. So I just want to kind of ask Keith, can you talk to those few programs that you're going to be looking at over the next few months or so?
Yeah, absolutely. I need Tyler to turn my video on. So but I'd be happy to see y'all. So basically, the programs that you see listed in the book are specifically related to, let me get myself started there. Thank you. Are specifically related to median and right-of-way maintenance and street maintenance. So I'll start with the street maintenance item. As you know, we've got a 5-year capital plan, which we didn't have before. We've got a pavement management plan. We've been able to shift some funding in there since our fire department departure. And so as part of that, we're looking at how we're deployed. And you certainly, Mark knows this, is our department's probably been organized in the fashion that it is for more than 2 decades. And with some changes in staffing, we're going to be looking to do some different things. And within the street maintenance area, there's a portion of the work that we do milling and paving. For those of you who don't, milling is when we take the machine out and tear all the asphalt up, and paving's putting nice new stuff back. And there's a portion of the work, 20 years ago, we jointly purchased a machine with the city of Englewood for milling. We have an agreement with them where it's stored at their facility because it has to be stored indoors, and we don't have a location to do that in our facility. They take care of maintenance, and about 1.5 years ago, they made the decision that they're probably going to get out of the milling business, but we're still working with them on that situation. And so a new milling machine, if we went to buy one, is at least $500,000, if not more. And when we run a milling crew, we usually have, including equipment, trucks, all those things, we have a crew of 11 on the street doing that. So we've been working on some analysis as to how we redeploy parts of our department. And so we are going to be considering us not doing any milling and adding that to our outsourced portfolio, because some of that we do already depending on jobs. And we have some other areas that we're going to consider taking on in a different way. A lot of our concrete pavement out there is in a pretty highly deteriorated state, and we might have to do some skills retooling to have our crews be able to pick some of that work up, as well as some other things. When you look at the numbers, one of the things, and Tiffany and I and Stacy have talked about this quite a bit, is if you look at the question of milling in isolation in PBB, you would say, oh, we should outsource this. The problem with that scenario is the same crew that's doing that is the same one that was out on the streets last night when it was snowing. And so, sometimes we actually say it, we have snowplow drivers that are doing asphalt in the summer. That's what the reality is a lot of ways. So one of the things that's important to us is looking at this in the context of everything we do. So if we do make this move, more than likely we're going to have to do some skills investment, but we think it may be a better strategy in the long run. From a time standpoint, we really won't be diving in this until the first quarter of next year in terms of looking at what we're going to do with this process. So we just wanted to let you know that one's out there in front of us. I'd be happy to take questions if anybody has one on that one before we jump into the median and right-of-way question.
We have no questions yet.
That's what I like. That's what I like to hear. So on the median and right-of-way maintenance item that you see, the citywide, we have over 450 medians in the city, which is an exceptionally high number for a city of our size with the lane mileage that we have. We also have a significant number of those that in most other communities, the developers or the HOA would have always had those and not the city. And we have a mix of those out there that are hardscaped, a mix of hard and softscapes, some that are irrigated, some that are not irrigated. And this is not just the medians as well, because we have right-of-way on each side. Mineral is a perfect example of this. And I've certainly had several of you talk to me about the medians on Mineral in the last month or so. And then we also have those ones, all the ones on Santa Fe are ours as well, because of an agreement that we signed 2 decades ago. And those are very difficult to maintain. You're talking high-speed traffic, all those kind of things. So this year we brought in an outside firm to take a look at that, do some comparison analysis for us. And of the 250 or so that we maintain directly, we're in the process of getting those into our asset management platform right now. And then once we get that in, it'll allow us an opportunity to really take a look at developing a level of service for each of those areas, for hardscape, for softscapes, and irrigated areas. So that, because there's some people in the community that want a median to look like Augusta National Golf Course, and other folks that want it to look like the Wild West Prairie. And, sometimes those nexuses don't meet, and very often that's in the same neighborhood. So, what we want to bring to you is for those particular areas, we want to be able to say, this is the level of service we believe is appropriate. Here's what it looks like. Here's what it costs to maintain. And then over time, as we do projects, how are we going to balance those so we get the right mix of, greenscapes, xeriscapes, hardscapes, and all of those types of things. The other part of this that you'll see as we come forward with this information is, much like all the other areas we've talked about, we really had no data on what was in there, and there's never been a maintenance and master plan for the irrigation systems in the city. We currently irrigate, including medians, over 2 million square feet a year. And we only irrigate one park, and that's Geneva Park next to the Littleton Center. So one of the things we have to look at is, what should we be irrigating and what shouldn't, and how do we get the right mix of that for appropriate water usage in today's world? And then the other part of that is more than 50% of our irrigation systems in the ground are more than 3 decades old, some 4 decades old, and the youngest ones are close to 2 decades old. And we've never had a maintenance plan other than, basically duct tape and wire to be able to keep those in shape. And the Mineral median is a perfect example of that this year. So we're going to be taking that on. Part of this too is that the only portion in Public Works where we had early retirement incentive, people take it, is in the grounds division. Our 3-decade manager of grounds is retiring at the end of the month. Our irrigation tech's probably going to go, and all of our irrigation knowledge is in his head right now. So we're trying to get that out into our asset platform. And then we had the only other one out of Public Works out of that same division. So we're really trying to figure out what we're going to do as we go forward, and we'll be bringing you a plan to do this. And I can tell you right now, it's not going to be an easy discussion in certain areas of the city. This is landscaping and city right-of-ways can be a very hot topic. So we want to bring you a plan that shows you what we have, what it costs to maintain it, and what a future plan would be to have appropriate levels of service for that. I mean, if we're going to spend a lot of money, I'd rather spend it on high visibility medians than low visibility medians as an example. And the other part of this is once we have that data, it's going to allow us to take a look at outsourcing that work or portions of that work so we can reallocate those resources to do some different things and allocate our people differently. Because an example of that is right now we have no seasonals because of COVID. In a normal season, we have 7. And the grass is still growing, things need to be mowed. So we're trying to come up with a more balanced approach to that as we go forward. So those projects are both underway. You'll see probably those in Q1, I would suspect, as we move forward.
Keith, we do have one question, Councilmember Elrod.
You guys should really bet on who has the question.
I was shocked.
Well, I'm glad you actually brought this up, the medium landscaping, because I happened to notice, I don't know why I noticed it more this year than maybe other years, but the medians along Bowles are in really bad shape. Is that uniquely to this year? Is it because you don't have the seasonal workers this year? What's going on there?
There's a combination of things. First off, yes, we don't have the seasonal workers, and we are just both Bowles and Mineral. Those are multi-decade old irrigation systems that we're just trying to keep in place and operating, and we just don't have the staff to go out there and work on them. So we're doing our best. And additionally, this is also the hottest summer on record. And as part of this process too, we did cut back water usage this year. So that's a combination of things. I mean, that's part of developing that plan going forward and having a discussion about where do we invest our money when it comes to that. An example where this will be in front of you is Jameson Bridge. For those of you that don't know it, it's not really a bridge. It's an architectural feature that a developer really should have kept over on Jameson. It's the covered bridge. Next to that, we take care of 400,000 square feet of turf on that hill, which is too steep, probably shouldn't be irrigated, but we have some neighbors there that definitely want it to look really nice. So that's going to be a place where we're going to have a discussion about level of service in some of those areas and how do we manage that effectively.
I have a couple questions, and we'll go to Councilmember Driscoll. So under ground maintenance, was the ground maintenance, was part of that recategorized when I look at 303-7230? Tiffany, is part of that just recategorized?
Let me check. Keith, if you recall, it went down about $40,000 ground maintenance materials.
Yep. Yeah, we just bought less stuff.
But I'm talking about year 17, 18, 19. Was it in that? Was it a different account number or?
I think that was 7,300 at that time.
Oh, yeah. So in years 2017 through 2019, it was account 7,300. So a few lines below that. Yeah.
And then my second question, then under tree planting, same page, because I noticed some trees are dying on Bowles when I was out West Bowles there. But we're cutting down on trees?
The answer to that question is no. We're not cutting down on trees, but we're in the median area. Part of our asset identification is tree stock. That's one of the things we want to get into in our asset platform because there's a value to that to the community. And the dollar value is very significant. And so part of that discussion is are there some medians we should be having trees and some we shouldn't? And an example of this from a purely public works standpoint is going to an arterial with 30,000 vehicles a day and putting trees in a 3-foot tree lawn between the curb and the sidewalk. You're guaranteed probably a 70% die off of trees because of air quality, water, and spray from the road. That's almost a given. So it's about making good decisions as to where we do plantings. And, one of the other things is admittedly, when Dave retires, that's going to be a big thing. I mean, he's been our arborist for a long time, and his knowledge of our tree stock especially is outstanding. And so that's something we're trying to capture right now.
Council Member Driscoll, then Milliman.
Yes, Keith, Karina brought up a good point along Bowles. Certainly that's my corridor. And I obviously notice it every day. That's one of my pet peeves along in any city. And certainly when you drive up Bellevue to Denver Tech Center, if you notice the beautiful job they've done on their mediums. I think a lot of citizens would just like to see it weeded, just cleaned. You know, it's not so much, we don't need beautiful flowers. We don't need grass. We just want to weed it. And I don't think that's asking too much.
So I would like to add to that. The answer is yes. I've been trying to put crews out there, but we have half the normal workforce and we still have to mow 2 million square feet of turf. So we're trying to manage that. The second thing I'd like to point out is when we make a comparison to something like the tech center, that's entirely paid for by a metro district. It stayed with the developer when it was built. And one of the problems that Littleton has is we just said, sure, we'll take it. And so we have our percentage of medians that we take care of compared to our peers for lane mileage is an extremely high number. And we've never had a plan to manage that effectively other than just keep them going. And so we're going to try and tackle that.
Is there an opportunity, Keith, and this might just be completely off the wall, but for the community involved, I mean, I could see Beaumar and Hamlet, and I should say Beaumar South and Hamlet, if you put out a reach and say, hey, we're going to be closing, lanes of streets to allow the neighbors to get in there with your supervision to get this cleaned up. Is that too far out of the realm or is it too dangerous?
I would say that that's possible in a neighborhood situation, but for something like Bowles and Mineral, that we're talking high volume arterials with high speeds. Right. Reed's probably shaking in the background off camera right now.
I get that. I just thought I'd throw it out there.
Yeah, I agree with you, Pat, that the opportunity exists. And, frankly, I'd love to get in a position where maybe we redo some medians and we turn them back over to the HOAs in perpetuity. Might be a way for us to balance this as we go forward. But we just have to explore that. And part of it is getting that asset data in so we can actually make some real decisions and understand what we're working on. Because much like we had 40% more stormwater pipe in the ground, we got the same problem with this kind of asset as well.
Great. Council Member Milliman.
Don't yell at me when I ask this question. So you mentioned that this summer was the hottest summer on record. And I fully believe that that is going to become the norm, if not worsening over time. And in that case, replacing some of these medians or these even the roundabouts like on Cayley, those are kind of falling apart as well. And then I know it's hard to grow trees and we need the trees, but maybe putting in more sustainable or drought tolerant plants in those places.
I'm not going to yell at you about that. I mean, that's part of why we're developing the plan that we are. Mm-hmm. That was really never part of the discussion in the past. There's actually a pretty significant amount that is, most of the plantings we've done over the last decade are drought tolerant. But the places we put them in are hard to maintain either way. The other part of that is there's a cost to flipping those things over from green to xeric. There's a cost to making that happen. So that's part of the plan we're developing to bring forward, because it's my intent, part of a big philosophy from just my perspective as a public works director is we need to do a much better job of developing resiliency and sustainability into assets like that. And so, as part of that, that's looking at the water usage, looking at what's in there, looking at pervious versus impervious surfaces. So we increase water quality. All those kind of components are part of it that'll be part of that plan.
So and thank you for that. And so one other question is, you mentioned that Jameson Bridge and how much mowing and watering you have to do around that landmark, if you will. Any research on it probably would cost too much money, so I probably know the answer to this, but if you instead did something different, like terraced it, or something where you didn't have to water it, or you didn't have to mow it, I know it'd be an investment up front, but maybe, you know, over time it would pay off with less water usage.
We absolutely agree with that. That's a
AstroTurf for the
target
entire
area
city.
for us to take a look at. I mean, you know, that's something that's never been looked at. And it's like the other master plans that have just not been done. And that's what we're in the process of doing now. I'm glad you mentioned the actual Jameson Bridge, non-bridge. We're in need of probably $250,000 to $300,000 just to do basic maintenance on that. And it's a problem because it's an ongoing safety hazard. It gets hit probably anywhere from 4 to a half dozen times a year, either from sleeping and drunk drivers or height issues. And it's just, we ended up with it because I mean, I know the story of how we ended up with it, but that's something that's never been maintained, and we've just hacked along the way. And so that whole area we need to take kind of a grand look at as well. And those are also some of our verbal neighbors that it should be green and golf course looking out there. So.
Council Member Elrod.
Thanks. On the program highlights, the PBB for right away, it does say that staff reviewed current service levels. So where are we with right now? It looks like you have about $200,000 that goes towards this program. What is the current service level? How would you classify it today?
I don't know. The current service level is keep what's out there going, especially on the irrigation side. That's all we do. And so when we talk about level of service, what I mean is an example of this is, so I want you to picture something in your mind. So let's think of a median, and you can have something that looks like a golf course, something, and work your way down to basically a hardscape that's concrete, white concrete, not even colored concrete. And so part of that level of service discussion is A, what do you want in those areas? And then B, what does it cost to maintain those? And how do you prioritize the medians throughout the city to execute that? Right now, our level of service is keeping going what's been out there for the last 2 or 3 decades. And we're trying to improve that situation.
Can you link this back to the work we're doing right now in the downtown ULC? We've made a lot of recommendations, comments, support for, call it the landscaping, the green space, the open space, which takes into account our sidewalks, our trees, and whatever else we have to maintain downtown. So how is that going? That must affect this in some way. Tie those two together for me, please.
Well, first of all, we would classify, generally in most cities, you would take that downtown district and it would kind of be carved out a little bit differently. And you would have a streetscape plan for that, which includes all those things from pavements to trees, to tree grates, to lighting, to all that. And that's something that this city has never developed. I think that those of you who've been on council for the last few years have probably heard me talk about this before. That's something that we need to do. And we're almost at a crisis crossroads because Denver Water is going to dig up our main street. And we don't have a plan to address that right now in terms of what are we going to do. We're going to end up with hopscotch concrete colors as they cut back to the building faces. And we have not funded that work before. I know that a couple of years ago, prior to my arrival, it was proposed to council, and council flushed it from the consultant. So that's something that, we're at a disadvantage. And that's also something that I'm sure Mark would reinforce this is that's the kind of thing we would normally see a BID or a DDA play a very significant role in, both from funding and direction and planning. And so we've put some concept together, but that's about it. I mean, it takes real work because you got to go out there and you got to do detailed right-of-way work and all that and figure out electrical, water, all utilities. So it's pretty significant work.
What worries me, or maybe where my concern is that I'm trying to get to an answer on, is we're making a significant amount of recommendations regarding this in downtown in the ULUC. But I think I'm hearing that the right way to do this, or I'm not sure. I'm hearing that we need a street design plan. Streetscapes plan. So are we shoving things into the ULC that maybe we shouldn't be or might find ourselves not being able to execute against?
No, I don't think that at all. What's in the ULUC provides a pretty significant palette, in my opinion, a palette of opportunities and a toolbox to work within. And then within that toolbox, just like a developer would have, you have the opportunity to use those tools and that palette of services, that palette of options to be able to create the streetscape plan that you want. And so there's nothing in the ULUC that's going to limit our ability to do that. And in fact, it helps inform that process, I think, pretty well.
City Manager, did you want to add?
Yeah, Mayor, just a couple of comments here. We are on the third night going to be talking about the DDA and the bid, of course. And I think some of this conversation around the landscaping and a plan for that, the Denver water, certainly is going to be part of the discussion on why we need a DDA or a bid. On the medians, I just wanted to comment. I think we all recognize that this is a high value for this community, always has been. And I think what Keith's work is trying to do is trying to get a handle on what is it we got, and then have a discussion with council about what is it we should be doing. The cost of that is something that I think we're going to struggle with because we really haven't addressed this from this level of service standpoint. This is an item specifically that I would like to list as part of a possible supplemental appropriation for 2021, assuming the economy obviously responds, because it's likely when Keith brings his work back that we're going to want to invest a little deeper into what we've historically done. And in some cases, we're likely, I'm sure the council is going to want to make some change in the median, whether it's a xeric concept or even hardscaping. In the long run, some of these medians may be best served just to be hardscaped. So I think this is the work I think that Keith is trying to capture. The other last comment I'd make is on the ULUC. I think from my perspective here, I think where we're going in that conversation is definitely on target. I think one of the things that we need to recognize is that with new development, they need to take that responsibility here for the improvements they make, whether it's in the right of way or certainly on their property. But I think we're in a good position on the ULUC from my perspective. So just a couple of comments.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thanks, Mayor. Keith, what does it cost and how long would it take to put together a streetscape plan? Is the first question I have. And the second question is, if you had to estimate, how much is it costing the city to maintain that area by the Jamison Bridge in terms of irrigation and irrigation infrastructure and maintenance and labor?
I'll take the first question first, Scott. When we've talked through this with consultants, and Mark can certainly jump in on this as well. I feel like we're probably going to need anywhere from 85 to 100,000 to do a streetscape plan, because you're talking about a lot of on the ground design work as well. And the other part of that is doing a streetscape plan for a downtown requires a fair level of public engagement, because you want to have some level of consensus on that going forward. So that's the ballpark figure on that. If we pulled the trigger on that, that's probably a 6-8 month project to do, if there's consultant availability. Related to your second question, that numbers, I don't have that broken out yet in terms of the Jamison area by itself, only because we're still in the process of bringing all those assets into the system. If you look at the 200,000+, you're going to probably put 30% in there at least would be going to that particular area would be my guess, because you have 400,000 square feet of turf on that hillside. And for whatever reason, Excel seems to cut the line out there to the irrigation. It seems like every other day, and so it's one of the oldest systems in the city too. So that's kind of what I would guess, but we'll be able to drill into that a little bit more here pretty soon and answer that question for you, Scott.
Thanks, Keith.
Great. All right, thank you. I do have one question too. I think you had mentioned that public work is going to have a little bit of a brain drain coming up over this next year, and you're reducing the consultant expenditures quite a bit. Is that possibly going to change?
No, the big reduction related to the consulting fees is tied to the TMP. The previous budget year had the money set aside for the transportation master plan. We have enough in there to address the other projects that we need to get completed, like the engineering design standards, some of this other work that we've got built in. On the brain drain side, Mark and I have talked about, as part of this reorganization, is redeploying our staff in a different way, changing up some skill sets and changing the leadership layout within the department. But that's kind of in a holding pattern, really, until we see what the financial picture plays out in the future. Right now our focus continues to be, get those assets in there and start to really build some solid plans going forward, so that we can give you and the community the best information possible and make good decisions.
Okay.
And it's going to be an interesting transformation for us. If you look at my operations area, if you take grounds, sanitary and storm and streets, those three gentlemen have over 140 years of service to the city. And they're all due to retire. One's retiring in 3 weeks, and the other two can't, at some point. So we have a pretty significant challenge there, that we're just going to kind of work our way through an organizational transformation as we go forward, which for me is great. I love to do those things. So it'll be an exciting time for us as well.
Great. My last comment is Denver Water's working on a couple blocks of a laddie over this off of Littleton Boulevard, and they have large equipment out in front of people's houses, 2 blocks away. It's been there for a couple of weeks. Their work pace is not real fast. And it concerns me when we get down to the main street that they're going to have large equipment parked out there for weeks and blocking our businesses off, and their work pace seems to be very slow.
I can see Mark kind of chuckling as well in the background. Mark and I have already both lived through shutting down a downtown for major utility projects in our career, and we've learned a lot from that experience, painful and otherwise. So, one of the things that we've continued to work on with Denver Water is how do we improve that? They struggle. They have one follow-on contractor that they're basically limited to, and so they have some challenges there. I'm going to say without question right now, some of the things we've talked about for Main Street are pulling out the parking bulbs so we can keep a flow lane in there, maybe during construction, where the line ends up in the street versus another part of the street. It's going to be hard. Plus, they're cutting service lines as well to buildings. So it's going to be a very complicated project, and there will be disruption. There's no way around that. And for me, part of the reason the streetscape is important is because we don't want to have that project happen, and then every year for the next 3 years, we're going in and doing streetscape work behind it, because that only throws gas on the angst of the fire that you created during that project.
The city manager, you want to add?
Yeah, I think just to add to what Keith is saying here, I think anytime a water utility is doing this kind of replacement work in a downtown, it is unique. And I think this is one where both Keith and I, we've had the experience. So we know what needs to be done with Denver Water in order to set a work plan and basically hold them accountable for it. It's hard, but I think in this particular case here, we're going to have to really spend some attention to this thing and how they phase this thing and make sure they perform. It's clear this has the potential of doing great harm to our merchants downtown if they don't perform well.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we're certainly, I want to just add to that for a second, Mayor. One of the things that we recognize is one of the constant issues we have is Denver Water goes in, they do their work, and then their follow-on contractor lags a long time before they go in and get that top lift put in and the utility cuts kind of taken care of. So a year ago, a little less than a year ago, I approached Denver Water with a proposal that we would become their finished contractor for asphalt paving for certain jobs within the city, so that we could assure quality and timeliness closing the jobs out. And that's not something that they've ever done in partnership with the community before. And so right now we have 3 pilot projects that we're working with them on to test if that's a protocol that works, and they would be paying us for doing that work for them. at a competitive rate, but it would also allow us to assure quality and timeliness to get those repairs done on certain jobs. And so that's where we're trying to be innovative to see if we can kind of bridge that gap as well, just on the day-to-day stuff like you're seeing out there right now.
Great, thank you. Council Member Elrod.
Remind me, do we have a date or a year yet of when Denver Water will be starting that work?
No, we do not. They do know that like every time I call them, I ask them for another year later. So that's my strategy right now. The other strategy is tell everybody downtown not to drink a lot of water, because if we get a big water leak in there, that might move that timeline up immediately. So, that's really the biggest risk right now for that. A lot of their work is really getting focused on the short-term work to get lead service lines or lead parts of service lines taken care of throughout their district. So that a lot of their resources are going to that right now. So the delay is working in our favor to try and get ourselves ready for that.
So they haven't tried to say, so you keep asking for an extension. So is there a date right now that they kind of put out there?
No, I keep telling them 2022 at the earliest. Mark keeps saying, make sure it's like 3 years after I retire, whatever year you pick. So that's where we're headed. So but right now we've talked about 2022, but there's flexibility. And as long as, the lines out there are 7 decades old. So as long as we don't have a major break, hopefully we'll be able to be okay.
All right, great. All right. Any other questions, Council? All right, Tiffany?
All right.
We have one more question. I'm sorry, Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, sorry. Keith, are medians ever a place where public art can be successfully installed?
If there's anyone that knows that story, it's me. The answer to that question is yes. And I have been through that process many, many times in my career, including highly controversial art placements in roundabouts and medians. So to me, it's a great opportunity. As long as you find the right location, it's safe, you're not going to have the art get hit. There's a lot of great opportunities. And sometimes people think of that exclusively as sculpture. There's opportunities for art where, if you're going to go down a corridor, you can place significant art on the overhead mast arms for the light fixtures. There's a lot of opportunities that aren't just tied to, say, sculpture in the right of way. So there's some pretty cool opportunities there. And that's something that, the Tim Nims and I have talked about since I've gotten here. And, it's something that we hope to be able to add more of as we go forward and doing projects.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Yeah. All right. Tiffany, back to you.
All right. So some of the highlights from the line items for Public Works we kind of already talked about. One of the largest reductions we had in Public Works was related to the TMP plan. That was a one-time expense in 2020 that's not going to recur in 2021. So there's quite a large reduction related to that. And then throughout all of his divisions, he looked at his professional consulting dollars and reduced a number of those throughout as well. There's a number of reductions in the fleet division related to parts and supplies and fuel. And I believe that's just based on some projections of where fuel costs might be. With COVID, prices went down significantly. When they're going to come back up, we're just not sure when that's going to occur. But there were some reductions made to those line items as well. One thing that they're going to continue to do, and Keith, I don't know if you want to chime in a little bit, but we have a huge scanning program that they're working on in the Public Works Department. And we've actually been utilizing some of our employees that have either been laid off or on furloughs throughout COVID to help his department and I believe community development to try to push that project forward. But there is still going to be a need for some scanning in 2021. It's just a huge project that I'm sure Keith could tell you that it could probably take 5 years or even more than that to complete this project. But we're going to go ahead and continue with that. So there's $75,000 in the 2021 budget for that program as well.
I muted myself, so I'll add to that. Basically the simplest way to put this is we had all the public works documents in paper form going back to the 1950s. And as a city, we have a lot of that as well. And so our goal is we did spend a year on the project of just cataloging what was in there. And that included 3,000 individual files and catalog those. So now we're in the process of purging and scanning in. And our goal is to not only have, that access internally to use. So looking back at a development that occurred, we're doing research right now on all the developments around Ridgeview Park, and they go back as far as 62. So it's getting that in an accessible format. And then the other part of this is kind of that vision that we've talked about with community development and with, IT and GIS is, we'd love to get to a platform where you see in some other cities where a citizen can come in or a developer and click on a parcel, and you not only see all the development history, but all the documents that are attached to that within the city's portfolio, all the utility overlays on that. And that's the place we eventually want to get to with this project. But it is a huge undertaking. And as Tiffany mentioned, I got to say thanks to community development and IT and especially Tim with the library and museum. And when we are in the situation where employees were being furloughed this summer, we worked together to utilize some of those individuals with great skill sets to supplement our scanning project and really work on accelerating that. And that continues to today. And that partnership has been, outstanding in a great way for us to move the project forward, but also span this gap and some of those individuals that were, not working. So it's been a good project for us on both sides.
Great. All right.
All right. Well, that's all we have for the Public Works Department. So if Tim Nims, are you holding your hand up?
I did. I always forget where to push the hand button. So I saw the Mayor Pro Tem use this method a couple minutes ago. So I figured I'd use it too.
I ignored him too.
I appreciate that, Mayor. So one of the things that we actually talked about was yesterday. We just wanted to let you all know that yesterday we were informed that the department's receiving 3 awards from the American Public Works Association, one for our implementation of the asset management plan and the asset management implementation in the utilities. The second one is for the development of the TMP as part of Envision. And the third one is recognizing one of our employees, Art Duran, our utilities manager, as the Public Works Professional of the Year for Water Resources. So it's pretty cool. So we just want to let everybody know that that's kind of, we continue to work our way towards, redefining what we do and redefining excellence as part of the process. And to us, that's just another step in the right direction to get us where we want to be eventually in supporting the community.
Great. Congratulations. Councilmember Driscoll.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Keith and his entire staff. You're looking at the bottom line here over, 4 or 5 different divisions that you manage, Keith, savings of close to $450,000 compared to last year. So I know we've all had to cut back. I think your group is doing a great job, and I appreciate all your efforts.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily a saving. It's just reduced spending.
Exactly. Better said. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for bringing that up. All right, Tiffany, are we ready to move Keith out of the picture here and move on?
Almost. I'm going to mention one more thing. So we did get notice from the county that they have pre-approved the reconfiguration of the city council chamber. And so we're going to be moving forward. I think we might have already started moving forward the moment we got that notification. But we did get that approved for CARES Act funds. So that project is certainly moving forward.
Great.
And Keith assures us that it's going to be completed by December 30th.
Yeah, we've thrown the gauntlet down. By the way, we'll send you some We'll email to all of you some sort of updated sketches of the layout since we last shared that with you, that we continue to work in more detailed architectural design. So as we get those here in the next week, a couple of weeks, we'll share those with you just to kind of give you an idea what's going on in there and what the final product's going to look like when we get there.
Great, thank you. All righty.
Okay, now we're done with Public Works.
Thank you, Keith.
All right, moving along, we have the Library and Museum, and they are the last department scheduled for this evening. And we don't have any policy questions related to the Library and Museum, but we do have a priority-based budgeting highlight, and that's related to the Littleton Immigrant Resource Center, and that's on page 38. So I'm going to go ahead and let Tim kind of talk about LIRC and where that program is.
Thanks, Tiffany. Good evening, Mayor, members of council. Yeah, we're looking at, as you might expect, a reduction in services kind of across the board with the library and museum. And one of those areas is the Immigrant Resource Center. You will remember from back at one of our mini study sessions on this subject that there's kind of a breakdown between what the city has always paid for with LIRC, and that is essentially the Resource Center, English as a second language classes, and the language partner mentoring program. In 2012, we added 2 new programs, legal services and citizenship classes, when we received the USCIS grant. That grant was renewed a couple of times and then was not renewed in 2018. At that point, council picked up the funding for citizenship and legal services. So what we're doing is drawing back somewhat, pulling back pretty close to what the original model was. So we are keeping the Resource Center, we're keeping ESL and language partners. We're also going to keep a reduced capacity portion of legal services, because that turns out to be our biggest fee generator in the program. So with that and with the staff reductions that we've already realized, it should be relatively neutral on the legal services side of things, and should bring some money back in that would support the remainder of the program. So that's the plan going forward with with LIRC. We are looking at the possibility of reapplying for the USCIS grant. We did not apply this year. The window closed last week. The city manager had asked me to find out whether it would be possible to structure our grant application in such a way that we could limit the clients who come through LIRC to the 2-year period of the grant to complete their services. We have not gotten a response from USCIS. They're notoriously slow to get back on things like that. We think, researching it independently, we probably can do that, but you do have to have a plan in place for what happens with those clientele if the grant isn't renewed at Littleton. Probably a larger concern that Glacia Rebello and I had was the fact that USCIS did not change any of the metrics, the criteria that the grant is awarded under. So you'd still have to reach the same kind of goal numbers each quarter of the grant that we had under the first under the pre-COVID, if you will. We think that would be really difficult, particularly given just the concern about trying to do in-person classes. You're no longer able to count volunteer hours. So there are a variety of things that we think would work against being able to do that. So probably not the worst thing that we aren't able to submit this year, but we are going to keep looking and seeing if there's a way that we could do that in the 2021 grant cycle.
Okay. All right, we have some questions lining up. Mayor Pro Tem.
Mark, can this be a policy question the council considers along with the other 9?
Mayor Pro Tem, I guess what's the question? Is it more about funding it in full through the general fund?
Funding it at whatever level would be the policy question. Yeah, I think it's, and I guess let me expand on my point just for a second, right? We're engaged in this huge and historic and expensive effort to preserve and enhance character in the city, which I think is wonderful. But we can't define it as narrowly as just buildings, right? Certainly a huge part of the character of our community is things like the library thriving and the museum thriving, and our neighborhood grant programs and the money that we've given historically to nonprofits and LIRC. And I just don't want to see these go so quickly into the crosshairs of our budget cutting without a more three-dimensional conversation about whether that's what we really want or not. I recognize the funding challenges around LIRC, but I'd like the council to have a discussion about it alongside some of those other policy questions that we're considering that seem related to it, including, the neighborhood grants and the funding of nonprofits and so on. I think some of this needs to be not cut.
Well, the short answer, Mayor Pro Tem, is certainly. I mean, this is the opportunity for council. If you collectively decide you want to do something different within the budget, my suggestion would be we do add that to the parking lot if there's interest in doing that. I think staff is certainly prepared to tell you what the cost of that is. I think in just probably simple terms, Tiffany can correct me if I'm wrong, but if you want to bring it back to the level it was when the grant was in play, then you're probably looking at least $100,000 per year or $500,000 over the 5 years. And that certainly is going to have a bottom line effect. My guess is that if you were to take that on, we probably should be looking at something that would have to be removed in order to meet our goals that the council has adopted here to stay within the 8 to 18% within the 5 year. Would that be fair to say, Tiffany?
I think the parking lot idea is a good place to put it right now because it's going to take a lot more discussion.
Sure, no problem. Be happy to do that.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
We have Council Member Elrod and Milliman.
I would support that. Thank you, Scott, for sharing that. As far as the services, being able to attain your citizenship through this, of what you're still proposing to keep here, which is the language and I think some other types of services, how much of those members, clients, I'm not sure what to call them, are also doing it because of the opportunity to become a citizen? So how much overlap is there between those coming in just for language and those coming in for language in order to achieve that citizenship status?
There's quite a bit of overlap, Karina, with between legal services and citizenship classes, as you would expect. There's less with the ESL classes. A lot of those are being taken by folks who either are citizens and want to improve their language skills, or who are not sure if they want to go down the full pathway, but want to be better communicators in English. So the overlap is more significant between legal services and citizenship, I think.
So that's one of the reasons that it's made sense in the past to truly make it a complete package, so to speak.
Yeah, if you're looking strictly at usage, certainly the ESL classes are the most utilized service that LIRC provides. Legal services is number 2. Citizenship is a ways down there. Those are the classes that help you prepare for the examination for citizenship. So there is a smaller group that is looking specifically at that. The legal services is a bigger piece, and particularly because of the cost associated with retaining an immigration attorney versus coming through our center.
Okay, thank you. Council Member Milliman, and then Grove.
Thank you so much for all this information. Of course, I volunteered at Littleton Immigrant Resource Center, so it's near and dear to my heart. And I appreciate Scott asking if this could be added as a policy question or going into the parking lot. I completely agree with that. I know that we're in, a budget crunch and we've got to make those cuts. But anything that we can do to try to salvage any kind of piece of the Immigrant Resource Center would be so important to our community. And to the folks that have gone through that program and that are going through that program, in addition to the volunteers that work in that program, pulls everybody together in our community. So I just think it's really important. And Karina asked one of the questions I was going to ask. So I can't remember what my other question was, but I will say the inclusivity is one of the core values within the comp plan. And I think that this program is a shining example of that. So thanks
Great.
for asking that question, Scott.
Councilmember Grove, then Fay.
Let me make sure I'm clear. The three programs that will continue, the ESL, the Resource Center, and the Language Partner, we have money for that. We're really talking about the citizenship classes and the legal. Is that correct?
Actually, probably just the citizenship classes, Pam. The legal services, I think, are largely going to be cost neutral because of the fees that come in for that piece of it. So
okay, and could we even hold citizenship classes, or are you holding them virtually, or how's it working right now?
Excellent question. We are transitioning over, over to online ESL classes, and we're testing that this year, this semester. So far, we've gotten decent response on registrations. We have not tried to figure out, a way to do the citizenship classes online. That would be more challenging. I think it's probably doable, but it's not something that we've gotten in depth in at this point. The ESL classes are kind of our test run at this point.
So from what I'm hearing, what we're really looking at is citizenship classes that we can't offer right now because of COVID.
Yeah, you certainly can't.
Is that it in a nutshell?
Yeah, you certainly can't offer them in person.
So we don't know how long this is going to last. So, and we can definitely parking lot this, but one thought that comes to my mind is that this might be something that Mark keeps saying that we look at a certain point in time when we could offer them, because to allocate $100,000 on something we don't even know if we can offer seems to be earmarking a lot of money for something we don't offer. Or we can't offer. So I don't know. I'm not saying we shouldn't, and I'm not saying we shouldn't bring it back. I'm not saying we shouldn't get a grant, but that seems like something we may want to consider evaluating when things loosen up more so.
All right. We have Council Member Fay, then Mayor Pro Tem.
I too have volunteered lots of hours at the Immigrant Resource Center, so I also am making a claim to having invested quite a bit in that resource. I want to clarify, Tim, because we've gotten so very many emails from people, and I have to say the emails sound alarmingly the same, but we've gotten a lot of them from people who want to preserve it as if it is all going away, if it's all or nothing. What you've just said is, Tim, I'm looking for validation or clarification here. Again, that we are going to keep ESL, the Resource Center, and legal services. Is that right?
Yes, and language partners, which is kind of partnered, kind of a combination with ESL classes.
Okay, so we're keeping, it sounds like we're keeping 4/5 of the services, and that the citizenship classes are the only thing that we're, quote, putting on hold because we can't conduct classes right now. Is that right?
That's correct. There'll also be reduced capacity in legal services, but yes, that service would still be offered.
Okay, and per what Pam said, that we can't offer citizen classes right now. Anyway, new question. Is there a way to outsource citizen, to send people to another source of citizen classes rather than us offering them?
There is. There aren't a lot of places in the metro area that offer them. City and County of Denver has a program. Boulder has a program. Aurora used to. I don't think that theirs is still in existence though. But yeah, there are other options in the metro area.
And citizenship is U.S. citizenship, so it seems like it wouldn't, since it would be online anyway, it wouldn't have to be local.
Yeah, absolutely.
Could you, for when we inevitably look at this again on the parking lot, could you look into the resources that we could refer people to? We offer these 4 things. The one piece we don't offer anymore because of COVID is live citizenship classes. We suggest you check out the online classes at these sources. And we've referred them. I'm not suggesting that we pay for those, but that we send them elsewhere for the research. And then it seems that we would be in a position to respond to those inevitable emails saying, and Mark, I would like your feedback on this, that you as a city manager could say, we are still offering, you would put this in your words, not mine, of course, 4/5 of the services that we offered before. Mark, could we do that?
Well, certainly. You know, I realize how much history is tied between this issue and the city. And I think we should be very proud of what we've been able to accomplish.
I'm not saying we wouldn't be proud. I'm saying we're going to stop hiding from this and be out front and say, we're doing this. It's not a case we're not doing this. We are doing it.
And I think that's my point I'm trying to communicate through the budget process here, is that we are doing what we believe we can afford to do. And ultimately, that is my responsibility, to submit a budget to the city council that I think meets the community needs. In fact, through the community scoring system of priority-based budgeting, this particular service is less aligned with any of the other services. So you can see that in the sheet. Again, this is priority-based budgeting is just a tool for the council. You can obviously do whatever you feel is necessary, but I'm trying to provide you some kind of context so that you can make, in essence, one of the tougher decisions. What I believe in the budget here is how to manage this particular issue, again, where we've had a lot of history with it. So I think there's options.
Mark, what I'm trying to get at, and I kind of feel like you missed what I'm trying to get at, is that we are budgeting for ESL, for the Resource Center, for legal services, for the language partnership.
Correct.
And that's for big services. The only services of the LIRC that we are not doing is citizenship classes, and the COVID epidemic precludes our doing that.
Correct.
Because we can't have in-person classes anyway.
Yeah, there's perhaps a little bit more to that, council member, but yeah, that's largely correct.
Yeah, I'm still missing what it is we aren't doing that we could do.
I'm suggesting in the budget what I believe we can do. So again, that's part of the parking lot discussion. That's all.
We'll get to it.
Please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tim and Mark, both. I appreciate it.
Mayor Pro Tem.
I had a museum question if we're ready to head in that direction.
I have one question related to this last topic, and Karina after that, on the Littleton Immigration Resource Center. I know the previous council was in favor of winding it down, the program, and had asked that was it the Littleton Immigration Initiative, find grants, and they were unsuccessful apparently at finding grants. So that's why why we're getting lots of emails from the volunteers about winding down the program. And that now, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, we had heard that 60% of the customers of that program or clients are not residents of Littleton. So when we do talk about that here in a couple of weeks, Tim, if you could bring us some statistics on what is actually the facts on that, that'd be helpful.
I certainly can, Mayor. I think what you may be looking at is the differences between the component pieces. Those pieces under the grant, under the federal grant, citizenship, and the legal services require us to have rather broad parameters geographically. So we did have a lot of folks coming in from outside the Littleton area for those two components. For Language Partners ESL and for the Resource Center, it is a much higher percentage are Littleton residents, but I can definitely get you that breakdown.
Yeah, that'll be good. That'll be helpful, because we're cutting programs for seniors that do live in Littleton, and here we are talking about providing a service for folks that don't live in Littleton. That concerns me a little bit. So if we're ready, I know Mayor Pro Tem has a question on a different subject. Scott, do you want to go now, or do you want to wait to hear a presentation on it?
I can wait. And I thought Karina had a question too.
She dropped off the question.
Yeah, I can wait. Yeah, of course.
Okay, cool. Let's go ahead and move forward then. That's a parking lot issue, that last item.
I actually have a presentation on museum or library other than just to, I know you all have seen the service level reductions that we're looking at for library and museum. Will be down about 40% in hours open to the public for the library, about 36% down for the museum through 2021. A lot of that is due to the substantial impact that Tiffany mentioned yesterday between the early retirements, a couple of resignations, and then some targeted layoffs that we had in my department. So that reduction, a still significant increase. We'll be moving to phase 2 of our reopening schedule next Monday. That will get us to those hours open for the library museum, and we would be planning to keep those at that level through 2021.
Great. I have a question. Then Councilmember Elrod has a question. When going through your proposed budget on the collection materials, where that's is your largest reduction in your budget, and what's the thought behind that? I mean, I'm thinking libraries, they do have collections, but times have changed maybe.
Well, not significantly, Mayor. That's a good observation. But that is about a 15% reduction in our collections area. We're going to do some combinations of things. We have switched somewhat, as you might expect during the pandemic. We've switched a lot of our targeted materials to online pieces. So we will need to rebalance that somewhat. But we can make do with a reduced number there. It is one of those where we were kind of trying to do our part as we deal with the city's financial issues, and certainly that is a large line item that it's probably the largest one in my entire department.
Yes.
So we've got a reduction there. It originally been projected at about 20%. We moved that to 15% with some other adjustments, but we can manage. It would be something that would be my top priority when we can add back into the budget, because you can only skimp on your collection material so long before you start becoming less attractive to our patrons, and they start.
Yeah. And I appreciate taking a hard look at that, because I know you made lots of reductions throughout, whether it be staff, collection programs, and things like that. So thanks for looking at that. We have Councilmember Elrod.
Tim, so yeah, really big hits to both the library and museum, and I know this is staffing. So what I'm understanding is you're not intending to hire staff back because you expect continued decrease in service ability. Is that correct?
Yeah,
that's for the rest of 2021.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. We projecting these hours forward through 2021. Even with the staffing reductions, we can do what we need to do. We'll be pretty bare bones, as you would imagine, but with less hours open to the public, it's doable.
And is that because of COVID? So are you expecting that the restrictions that we have now because of COVID into 2021? Or so let's say things improve significantly, we get back to, let's call it 100%, right? Would you at that point in time be prepared to bring back up the level of service, or is this essentially making the decision that despite the change in our environment, you are committing to a reduction in service?
We would certainly look at coming back at our pre-COVID levels of services if finances will allow it. I mean, that's probably if pandemic conditions improve that significantly, then it really is a question of what the city can afford to provide.
So this is a little bit more of making a choice to spend less.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the reality of where we are given the revenue situation that the city is in. We certainly all are recognizing the hit that the city budget has taken.
I will challenge some of this from a perspective of what we've heard from citizens, and in particular, when we look at the library really becomes that it's a resource center for many. It becomes access to material, computers, job hunting, retooling, retraining. So to me, this becomes a very important service to the recovery of our community. That's our responsibility, and that is what the library is there to serve. So it doesn't feel like this is where we should be cutting. I know it's like there's never an answer of where to cut the money, but these are, I don't know that this is the right alignment.
It's tough. It's tough. If we could hear from the city manager, then Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective. It is tough. And I think that we are in a financial position there that we just simply require some tough decisions. Is this the right area? Well, ultimately, that's going to be the call of council. I think the challenge that I've given every department director is they need to think in terms of the social distancing and health orders probably through the mid part of next year. So the library and museum is no different. So their service plan reflects largely that. In combination of that, they've also had some of the early retirements that we've had to implement across the entire organization in order for us to save the money. And so that is, remember, $600,000 across the entire organization every year. But at some point in time, sure, the council may want to, if the economy responds properly, add back those services. And I know that I've had conversations with each one of you before this process even started, where we do need to recognize that. We do need to be very cautious about how we view the economy next year and be careful about the expenditures that we plan. And then if the economy does respond, clearly the council has an opportunity here, maybe in the second quarter to add back services. My suggestion is that the library and museum, library perhaps is the higher priority, could be one of those services that we look at sooner rather than later. But in my opinion, we've got to get past COVID-19 and the health orders.
Yep. Mayor Pro Tem.
Tim, this is a screwball idea. And so tell me if it's a screwball idea. But is there any possibility that...
Is this humor by Scott?
No, this is a legitimate question. I'm just
okay.
Is there any chance the museum, while maintaining the integrity of its central mission, right, to be a museum, could maintain community-supported agriculture on its grounds, just to have some enterprise to help it sort of generate revenue, to help it generate community interest, to help it make food, things like that. I've always wondered that when I am on the museum grounds.
And there are museums around the country, Scott, that have done target program or private target programs like that. It's difficult primarily because one of our significant missions is interpretation of period agriculture. So the fields, while they certainly are by no stretch of the imagination production fields, that is where a lot of that educational process goes on. And even with a reduced schedule of public hours, we're still going to be continuing that. Particularly, the livestock still needs to have its daily fun with our staff, and the crop production still goes on as well. It would be hard. I mean, it's not something that would be impossible, but we'd have to really take a long look at how we would do that and exactly how you'd manage access to something like that. It would impact the interpretation pretty significantly, but I can certainly take a look at it. It's one of those that's it's a little outside the box, but it's not. I mean, it's not a crazy idea. It is something that is sort of in that hands-on type of interpretation program that museums could do.
It's similar to the conference rooms that you lease.
Yeah, I mean it's some level of access. Again, that rental pieces, it would be something we'd have to really take a hard look at as to how you'd manage that. But yeah, it's something we could certainly take a look at.
And the funds go into the general fund, as I understand it.
Yeah, all of our funds go to the general fund.
Exactly. Council Member Elrod.
The library and museum were actually the two areas that really pivoted to online and other ways to engage our public. They were really quick at that and very creative. So thank you to you and the team for transitioning so quickly. And so while, as Mark's point, we have to keep social distancing in mind, what have you considered or how do you consider what that next step of retooling is to say, how do we keep the library and museum still alive and well? If not only in its traditional form, because I do think in a future state, both its traditional form and some of these other ways that we engage are probably here to stay. So there are things like mobile libraries and mobile museums. I believe it's the Denver Museum of Nature and Science that has kind of their mobile truck. So to a certain degree, we already have those assets. We have the vans. Would that be something that we can consider not only as a response to COVID and potentially through the CARES Act, but especially as we think even in the future, this might be a way to truly access all of our community that may not be able to physically access the library or the museum. So it could be something that really has a long-term value and ongoing benefit. Can we consider that? Have you considered that, and how do we maybe take that forward?
Yeah, you're exactly right. One of the first things we learned, probably within the first couple of weeks of pivoting to digital programming, is that this is here to stay. This is not something that we're going to just do during the pandemic. It's become enormously popular, and frankly, I've been astonished and inspired by the creativity that my staff was able to jump to. So yeah, we're certainly going to be continuing with digital programming. A lot of the kind of virtual things that we have been able to put out there are things that we're going to continue doing going forward. It's really going to be finding that balance point as we increase our in-person programming. Warrant. We'll be looking to find that balance, that tipping point, but definitely the online world is something that we've gotten a good taste of, I think, and also our public has, and it's been the positive reception has been really gratifying. Mobile is a little tougher because it is a lot more staff intensive, but it's something that we're also kind of looking at. We have considered whether there might be some opportunities to do some things in the field, library probably particularly, but museum may have some opportunities to do the same thing. But definitely, Karina, digital programming is here to stay.
Okay, all right, thank you. Council Member Milliman.
I'm sure this is not going to be a popular question, but and maybe this is a question for Mark too as well. Has the city ever proposed charging like a nominal fee to get into the museum, whether that be like $5 for adults, $2 for children? Has that ever been talked about? and if it has been, why hasn't it ever been initiated as a way to try to help offset some of the costs?
It's actually a really good question, Kelly. And Jerry's laughing because he's been on long enough that we used to kid that every 2 years when a new council came on, someone said, "I'll bet no one's ever thought of charging admission at the museum." And then I'll pull out the 14 studies I think I've done since I've been here. And it's a great question. It's something we need to revisit on a fairly regular basis. The issue has always been whether to charge a nominal fee or whether to charge a market-based fee. If you charge a market-based fee, there is a revenue stream. It's not as big as people think it's going to be, but it's probably somewhere in the. And Tiffany can correct me. She's seen these numbers too if I'm wrong, but I think it's somewhere where you net out, $75,000 to $100,000. The issue has always been that councils have wanted to look at a more nominal fee, and the list of exemptions is pretty significant. We don't want to charge residents. We don't want to charge school districts within our city boundaries. So if you're going to start peeling off substantial components of that, where you end up with all the overhead and the both the one-time and continuing costs that you would need to set up a system for admission, you end up netting out somewhere in the $25,000 range. So I don't think any council has ever felt that it was worth the the public relations heartburn of trying to push that through. But the museum is certainly set up to do that. The configuration of the building when we constructed it was such that we could go into an admission fee model. Certainly doable.
Tim, if you could maybe share with all council, if you could send it out, the report that you did about 3 years ago, when I brought that very question up. It was a good study at that time. And it also related to being whether or not the museum could maintain its Smithsonian designation.
Yeah, that's a good observation too, Mayor. There certainly is no preclusion to being a Smithsonian affiliate if you charge admission, but there are hoops you have to jump through just to make sure that you're meeting the requirements. But yeah, I can absolutely send that out.
Yeah, I think it's a good one that Councilmember Milliman would appreciate too. All right, we have Councilmember Elrod.
As a follow-up to that, I think some of those studies were done at a time where it was, we're just going to start charging a fee, but the service isn't necessarily changing. So a service that you were used to having for free, now we're going to charge potentially. But we're in a different situation now where it's actually, you want the museum to stay open, then here's a way to be able to do it, so it's, we're in a different situation. I don't know how the community would react to it or not, but I think it does give them that choice, or at least that awareness to say, we're in a situation where financially we can no longer continue to operate in the capacity that this community is used to. An option would be to be a partner, or to help us to continue to do that would be a fee. So I think it's a different way to, it's a different situation that we're in now, that the fee may be what keeps this alive and well. And maybe the community would be willing to support that.
Great. Yeah, that study that Tim will send out will help all of us kind of get in line with the difficulties of why it has been difficult in the past anyway. So I don't see any more questions. You have anything else, Tim?
No, that's all for me tonight, Mayor.
Great. Thank you very much. Good presentation. Thank you.
Thanks,
back to you, Tiffany. Oh, I'll take that back. Councilmember Grove has something.
Sorry. Based on what Karina was just talking about and possibly charging in a different environment, is this something we can parking lot and address once we look at Tim's report?
So noted already, Councilmember.
Let's do it. It's worth the conversation. It is definitely worth the conversation. All right, back to you, Tiffany. Thank you, Tim.
All right, yeah, I did just want to kind of note that as a result of the early retirement incentive program, I think the library and museum is the largest department that was impacted by that. Tim kind of alluded to that, mentioning the layoffs and also the ERI reductions that were made. And so reducing that service was kind of a result of that as well. There's one other thing that I did want to note on the museum side is under the, I believe it's the Fine Arts Board or Fine Arts Committee, there was a reduction of $50,000. And if you recall, last year that was related to a fire commemoration that was in the 2020 budget, and we did remove that from the 2021 budget. And it also was something that was reduced as a result of COVID this year. And so that is not going to occur in 2020 either. So I did want to note that.
All right. Councilmember Elrod, I think has a question in regards to that.
Thank you, Tiffany, for bringing that up. I didn't realize or catch that was not being brought back. That was a something that council did approve. It was a request of council maybe a year ago. So, I did become aware that it had been removed from the budget this year, but again, this is something that, coming back to the point of doing this is, again, contributing to how we define character in the city of Littleton. We had such a long history with our fire department. So this was, this checked a lot of boxes from perspective of why we were doing it. And it was, to honor a very important part of our history. Maybe you or Tim can talk about why the decision was made to remove it from 2021 as well. And when can it come back, I guess?
Yeah, I think, if council would like to maybe add it to the parking lot for a discussion on the 24th, we might be able to do that. I think as far as why it was removed in 2020, on the onset of COVID, we really weren't sure how deep the impact was going to be. And so when we did a citywide review and worked with the departments, this was just one of those items that we decided to remove at that time.
And I think that's very fair, very understandable for 2020. Also, logistically, it would have been hard to do, but would be good to have a discussion of getting it back in for 2021, please.
With that in mind, I just assume have a statute for our police. Our police are still with us, and I think they need support like that too. So if we're going to talk about giving statues out to honor folks, I think the police department should be right there with them. Tiff, anything else in this area?
I don't have anything in particular for library museum. We've already kind of touched on all of the points this evening.
Great, then we're ready to move on to our capital project funds.
All right. Yes, our next topic. Oh, sorry, Mark.
City Manager.
Can I interrupt? Mayor, could I suggest that we just take maybe a 10-minute break? Yeah, and the next topic is going to take a little more robust conversation.
All right. It is 7:50. Why don't we take a 10-minute and we'll come back at the top of the hour.
Thank you.
8 o'clock. All right. the city council meet again for 8 o'clock, back from our recess. And Councilmember Grove had a question right as we went into our recess. So if I can, Councilmember Grove, if you would go ahead.
Thank you very much. I just wanted clarification on what the $50,000 was in the budget. And then I have another question as
That's fine.
Point of clarification. So Tiffany, can you tell us what what was cut out of the budget? I think.
Sure. The $50,000 was related to an art sculpture of some sort that was going to be to commemorate the service of the fire department based on the transition to South Metro.
Okay. And then thank you for the clarification. And then my second question was, the Fine Arts Board was hiring a consultant for this new commission. Is that still in there, or has that been reduced? Is that still happening?
Tiffany, do you want me to take that one?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Pam, are you talking about the consultant we have for the Arts and Culture Commission?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, yeah.
Fabi.
Yeah, Fabi Hilliard. That contract continues to run, and she's working with the Arts and Culture Commission as they put together recommendations to come to council. In fact, we have a meeting tomorrow evening, so she is still under contract as our consultant.
And is that a line item? Can you talk to? Is that a special line item, or is it separated out, or?
It was coming out of our professional and consulting line items in library and museum.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
Was that it? Good. All right. All right, Tiffany or Mark, if we could move into or city manager, if we could move into our capital projects.
All right, Mayor, thank you. So we've been through the general fund, and clearly we have some challenges there. Appreciate again the questions and the challenge that we're all faced here. I think the next fund, the capital project fund, is one that I've shared here a few times, even publicly, that I've got some real concerns about where we're at. And I know that council can appreciate kind of the magnitude of the challenge here, but I think I'm going to ask Tiffany to go ahead and make her presentation about the capital projects fund. And then I think at the end of that, I just would like to kind of share with you a few words about where I believe things are at and what are probably going to be necessary for us to kind of meet the challenge here. So if you're okay, Mayor, we'll let Tiffany proceed. Okay.
Tiffany.
Okay. All right, so our next topic is going to be our Capital Projects Fund. The Capital Projects Fund is the fund that funds the majority of the infrastructure in the city. So any large capital improvements, this could be streets, this could be light fixtures, this could be building improvements, this is also information technology, our fleet replacements for all of our vehicles. All of those items are housed in the Capital Projects Fund. So in 2021, we're estimating the fund balance to be about $2.4 million. Our revenues are going to be about $6 million, and our expenditures are going to be about $7 million. And to the right is a graph that kind of shows you where our fund balance has been in the past and where we envision it being in 2021. As far as revenues, there are three main dedicated sources of revenue for this fund. We have highway user tax funds. This is a gas tax that's collected when people purchase gas throughout the state of Colorado. It's distributed to municipalities across the state, and that's about 21% of revenues. Annually, we get about roughly about $1.4 million. Due to COVID and with the number of people not traveling and not purchasing gas, we're definitely going to see a decrease of this in 2020. We're estimating we're going to be about $1.2 million, which is about a 14% increase or decrease in 2020. We're also going to see a decrease in 2021, just kind of based on estimates that the state has provided and seeing where we're at today. We're only going to be at about 1.26 million in 2021. We're hoping it will go up from there, but we're still being conservative in our out years on those revenues as well. The second largest sales tax, or second largest revenue for capital projects fund is building use tax. This is a tax when someone comes to the city and they want to build a garage, if they want to build a new structure in the city, a housing development, any kind of capital improvements like that that fall under the purview of the building department, they're required to pay a use tax. And it's a 3% tax, just like our sales tax, it's 3%. And it's based on, it's charged on 52.5% of the value of the project. And so this is definitely a highly volatile sales tax revenue for the city. It's the second largest one that funds our capital improvements. And so the volatility really plays into what we can and can't do as far as infrastructure is concerned. In the past, this has been as low as almost $400,000 in 2010, but it's also been as high as about $3 million in 2016, but it fluctuates every year. Based on where we are today, I'm going to say this, we're hoping we're going to get about $1.2 million. I'm still a little concerned about building use tax. We don't have a lot of projects coming in right now. Hopefully that we'll see an uptick in that, but I'm hoping that we're going to come in at about 1.2 million. Typically we budget 1.5, knowing that it's going to be a little bit higher, it might be a little bit lower. In 2021, we're only budgeting about 1.35 million. So these are definitely 2 years of decreases in the number 2 revenue source that funds these projects. The third one that we have is the transfer from the general fund, and this is by far the largest. The difference is this is specifically for street maintenance and improvements. And so that is dedicated only for those projects. We aren't allowed to use this for infrastructure related to information technology, our fleet replacements, or even meeting our debt payments. So that is purely dedicated to street and infrastructure improvements. Some expenditures that we have out of the capital projects fund, this also pays for our leases. The city has a few leases still out. We have a lease on the courthouse. It's a certificate of participation that was issued. It is due to be paid off in 2024. And then we also have the museum lease purchase, and that is scheduled to be paid off in 2022. And then we have a small radio lease that's currently related to the police department that is scheduled to be paid off in 2024. One of the things that we have in our financial policies is our number 1 priority is to meet our debt obligations. And so in 2021, you're going to see about $1.4 million worth of debt payments, and that's for the courthouse, museum, and the communication equipment in the police department. One thing that we did have to reduce this year, historically, we have had $800,000 related to vehicle replacements. And just based on where we are financially, the loss of building use taxes and some other priorities in the fund, we did have to reduce the vehicle replacements to $180,000. I mentioned we typically have $800,000 in there. I believe the original request that we had from the fleet department was about $1.5 million. They did dial that back a little bit to about 1.2. But just based on where we are financially, we reduced that drastically to only $180,000. And the intention with the $180,000 is to replace some of our police vehicles. They see a lot of wear and tear, and we want to make sure that we keep those outfitted and on the road and in safe condition. The other part is technology. We have a number of annual replacements that for computers, servers, hardware, a number of items on the technology realm. And again, we're only able to budget $340,000 in 2021. We have some equipment that's related to the police department. This could be MDTs, computer terminals, things of that nature. And again, we're allocating $203,000. We have our streets and infrastructure bucket here at 4.4. It's roughly the same amount as our HUTF and the 3.1 million that's coming in from the general fund. And that's all we have related to streets and infrastructure. For ADA improvements, we have $100,000. And again, this is certainly not enough to address all of the ADA needs throughout the city, but it's the most that we can provide in 2021. And then lastly, we have our building improvements. This is about $300,000. We have over 25 buildings that the city manages throughout the city. And we are only allowed $300,000 to address any maintenance issues, any replacements, any upgrades to all of those buildings. I think $300,000 honestly does not even touch where we need to be as far as building improvements. Last year, $300,000 replaced a few windows and some seals throughout the city and did a few other things, but there's certainly a much higher need related to building improvements in the city.
Hello, Tiffany, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Mark, are you still there?
Can you not hear me?
I hear. Can you hear me?
I hear Mark now and Tiffany.
Okay.
I think you froze for a bit there, Mayor.
Thank you.
Oh.
Nope.
Sorry, can I continue? Are we good? Okay. So, you know, one of the things that we have struggled over the last few years is really managing our capital projects fund. With very few revenues coming in and such a high demand of use of those funds, we've really had to constrain our next 5 years from this fund. You know, we've got our dedicated street maintenance revenues that is specifically for street maintenance. And if you can tell here at the end of 2025, we really have depleted this fund. We are in dire need of additional capital improvements throughout the city. I mentioned they requested $1.5 million related to fleet replacements. And just based on where we are, we're only able to fund $120,000 this year. I think one of the other things that we're going to struggle with in the future is, you know, meeting our grant obligations. We have a number of grants that we've applied for and we're committed to, and we are struggling to find matching funds for that. We have some dedicated over the next few years, but beyond that, we're really going to struggle to meet some of our grant match requirements. I think a few of you have seen a slide similar to this in the past. We have over $98 million of unfunded capital projects. This is a list that we have continued over the past few years, and all we're doing is adding to this. We've addressed a small portion of this with the $3.1 million, but that's only for street maintenance. That doesn't address some of our Santa Fe improvements that we're going to have in the future. That doesn't address a number of other projects that we have on the horizon. I think several of them that we've talked about in the past is Building 2 over at the Service Center. The whole campus over at Bellevue Service Center needs to be updated and improved and enhanced. And also, even this building here, this building was built in 1976. The HVAC system needs to be upgraded, replaced. We're talking millions of dollars that we're going to have to address just in this building alone with an HVAC system. We have a number of other buildings throughout the city that we are barely able to keep them maintained enough that there's not going to be any huge issues or concerns or safety issues. I can't emphasize enough how small or how little funding we have to address all of our unfunded capital projects. We have Geneva Lodge that's next door to the city. We're going to be taking that building back. There are so many upgrades that need to be done to that building so that we can utilize it in a good fashion. You know, I think in the past, we've kind of masked some of these issues and found some one-time funding to help address some of this. Back in 2009, we did a very large transfer of almost $11 million from a water tap fund that the city had So that kind of band-aided the issue back in 2009. And so we were able to use that to address, again, a small portion of our needs. The other few one-time advances we've had to this fund is related to water rights. The city worked with Denver Water and relinquished water rights for $2 million. That was put into the capital fund to address some of our needs. We also had some streets within the city that the city worked with the state of Colorado, and they relinquished the maintenance of those streets, which probably at the time might have sounded really good because we got almost $2 million from the state to manage those. But over the years, $2 million is not going to even address the maintenance needs of those two streets in the city. So these are just a few one-time revenues that have come in, but we don't have any more one-time revenues. We don't have any more water rights that we can sell. We don't have a water tap fee fund that we can transfer from into this to address some of our needs. We just don't have a dedicated funding source. We have building use tax, and it is so volatile that it's really hard to plan any large projects when you're not sure if you're going to get 300,000 in 1 year or if you're going to get 2 million. It makes it very difficult to plan in the future to address some of these capital needs. I think, I talked about building maintenance. We have a mere $300,000 in our 5-year plan. In talking with Keith and understanding what our needs are based on the square footage of the buildings that the city has throughout, we need at least $970,000 a year just for maintenance, and we only have $300,000. So we really are only addressing a third of our annual needs just on our buildings alone. And I can't emphasize again on our fleet replacements. I know Alan in our fleet department has a scheduled replacement plan of our vehicles. And I don't think we've been able to match that since probably 2006, maybe even 2007. We just have historically just replaced when it's basically falling apart and we just can't run it anymore, or the maintenance is just too high. So we've been very limited in what we can do in the past few years. Let's see. Mark, I don't know, you have anything to add?
We're looking for happy news, Mark.
Sorry, Mayor. I'm afraid I don't have any happy news. I think we have an interesting history here in our city of how we've managed capital. And I think Tiffany's done a pretty good job kind of summarizing that. We've had these one-time kind of transfers that really have put us in a pretty decent position. Unfortunately, it wasn't a long-term kind of revenue strategy. And so as a result, over time, we've been underfunding a whole series of different categories year after year after year. And I think, in my opinion, we've reached a point where we cannot sustain this any longer. It has gotten to a critical stage where, I'm just going to use the analogy here, where we have a house that we've been painting over and over again. But what's happening underneath all that is the foundation is crumbling. And our community cannot see that. We have a very difficult story to tell here. We are not in a position for us to kind of manage the long-term capital needs of this community. There's all sorts of reasons why things got combined into the capital project fund, and maybe at the time it was for good reason, but for today, it is really a problem. The fleet, for example, in most cities is typically excluded out of the capital project fund, is a standalone fund paid by different users within the general fund or the utilities at a user rate. And so it's kind of a standalone fund that pays for fleet when it's needed. And the fact that we have a need of 1.5 million and now we're down to 200,000, quite honestly, it's just irresponsible. What that translates into are costs that eventually will come back to the general fund in higher maintenance, in breakdowns, in inefficiency in service. We won't be able to perform the programs and services because the equipment can't meet the demand. That's where we're at. So the fleet is in a very difficult position. The building maintenance, I think Tiffany did a really good job there. I think the fact that we need to be spending roughly $1 million and we've only been spending 300,000 for as long as I'm aware, maybe beyond 10 years. And all that's done is just weaken the foundation of our capital fund, of our buildings, and has put us into a much deeper hole. You know, many of you have probably been to the public works facilities there off of Bellevue. Keith has certainly talked about this before. You know, building 2 was, if I remember correctly, Keith, was built right after World War II. And I think if you walk the building, you'll notice that it's a metal building and that the corrosion has over time in all sorts of locations has made its way through the building. And we've patched it and patched it and patched it. And it's just way beyond its useful life. Again, that is just irresponsible. We must have some kind of a strategy to replace not just that building, but the other facilities in public works. There must be a strategy. Now, prior to COVID, we've had a fair amount of conversation about trying to look at strategies to make sure that our general fund is in a responsible place. And so that if there was resources that could be transferred to the capital fund, that's certainly been our history. And one success that I think we just need to acknowledge and celebrate over and over again is the fire vote. When we were able to get the citizens to support that, to transfer the 3.1 million out of the general fund to the capital project for street maintenance is a huge success. And so we must acknowledge that. But pulling that issue aside, there's a whole list of issues that our community has asked us to address. Year after year, we've been doing polling and asking them, do they support a sales tax increase to kind of manage basically the impacts of growth, transportation projects? And it's year after year, the answer is yes, they would do that. My opinion, it is time. We cannot delay or kick the can down the road any further in the capital project fund. We cannot transfer enough out of the general fund to make it work. You would have to take the entire cost of the library and the museum and eliminate them and take that revenue from the general fund in order to make the capital fund work. It's that magnitude of a problem. It's not realistic to think that the general fund can solve this issue. We're going to have to find another dedicated source of revenue. The highway user tax fund, again, Tiffany has explained that that has been a pretty steady resource over time. It's obviously a state gas tax. We all know that it doesn't really support the kind of revenue that really is necessary based on the impacts of vehicles. And so over time, we've just certainly accepted that. I think it's to the point now where we must think in terms of a sales tax for capital. And in my opinion, it needs to be very specific, very targeted around the impacts of growth. An example is Mineral in Santa Fe. It's not to build a structure for which would be this huge monolith in the middle of the intersection. Our community would not accept that. We are going to have to find solutions that our community would accept, and we're going to have to target those. And I'm confident that if we tell the story that right now, we cannot manage the impacts of growth without this increase, and we show them a very specific list, and that list needs to be manageable. It needs to be achievable. It needs to be done within a short period of time. And in my opinion, if we put that together as a sales tax increase and that we retire that increase once the debt is paid off, it's those kind of strategies that I'm sure that our citizens will look at and say, that probably makes sense. So my request of council this evening here is not to say yes or no to a sales tax increase, but at least maybe by the end of the third night, when we're perhaps have the budget kind of settled, is to at least acknowledge that we need to talk about this more. We need to make a decision about what we're going to do in the capital project fund. In my mind, the best milestone that council probably needs to target is probably the retreat the 1st of February. If we're going to do a sales tax increase in 2021, that's the moment in time for which council would have to tell staff to proceed. We can't wait beyond that date because the complexity of the issue, much like fire, takes time to put that message together. So I'm hoping that council will see the challenge we've got in the capital project fund and try to work towards a discussion over the next several months and target that 1st of February as a decision point. And that's my request.
Great, thank you. You've been on this same mantra basically for the last 5-6 years that you've been here. Yeah. So is this on the sales tax for the capital funds? Is that something you want to put in a parking lot? You want to discuss it more tonight? What would you like to do, Mark?
Well, I think it's worthy of some conversation here tonight. I think we certainly allocated some time. I'm sure that we'll probably need to give it some consideration, all of council plus staff. And then the third night, we probably should wrap up and have a conclusion to that. And again, that would be my request, is that council give me some direction about what you want to do for the capital project fund. And if I may, Mayor, just a couple of things that we should consider when we look at a strategy here, not just for growth here, but I think we've talked about the opportunities of downtown. I think with Denver Water coming into Main Street here within the next 2 to 3 years, and if we can get a bid or a DDA formed in that area and have a real partner in the downtown, I think there's an opportunity to explore what kind of a project would it be for Main Street. Once Denver Water tears everything up, what are we going to put back? And so I think there's elements like that. I think we also need to look at strategies through the Transportation Mobility Board, specifically task them. That's why they were created, is to ask them what are the real priorities when it comes to projects of growth. It's not just cars, by the way, in my opinion. I think we should challenge them to look at bicycles and pedestrian improvements. So I think it's probably a mixed bag of projects that make sense to manage growth. That's my suggestion, is the kind of discussion that perhaps council should have over the next, maybe tonight and probably for the next couple of months.
We have Council Member Milliman with a question.
Hey, this is a question for Reed, because I know he brought this up in the past. Reed, when was the last time our sales tax was increased? And then Tiffany, a question for you, based on numbers of today, how much more would, if we were to raise the sales tax to, I think we were talking 0.75, is that right? Or
0.75 cents, yeah.
0.75 cents. How much more money would that bring into the city?
So I'm gonna beat Reed to this answer, and I think I'm correct. I believe it was 1970 was the last time that the sales tax rate has been increased. We did attempt a ballot question in 1991 to increase it, but it did not pass. Is that correct, Reed?
That is correct. It had been 50 years, so I think that made the 1969 ballot and was approved. So it hasn't changed in 50 years.
Yep. And as far as the dollar amount related to a 0.75 cent increase, if it applies to retail sales tax, general use tax, building use tax, and motor vehicle tax, which council would have some discretion, all 4 of those, it would be about $9.1 million annually. So if we increased our sales tax rate from 3% to 3.75%, it's about $9.1 million a year.
That doesn't really touch, what the unfunded projects are for the capital projects, correct?
So we have about $98 million, and I'll caution you, those are just identified infrastructure needs. There are probably so many out there that once we are able to really assess the status of all of our infrastructure, that number could be severely deflated. It could be upwards of 120 million. It could be upwards of 130 million. But that divided by, 15 years? It's about $6.5 million if you allocate it out annually. just the 98 million.
And Mark, are there any other, sources of funding for these capital projects to look at in addition to sales tax increase?
Well, certainly impact fees. We've been talking about that for some time, but they're for new growth. So new projects, new development. And so impact fees cannot pay for what we call deficiencies. So that's on us. And so currently, because we haven't addressed growth over time, we have a large deficiency when it comes to transportation. So impact fees is a strategy, but it cannot overcome this problem. I think the other part here is that I would share is that it's not so much important to talk about how much the sales tax would be at this point, whether it's 0.5 cent or 3/4. To me, it's more about what are the real priorities here that we believe we can manage as projects that respond to growth, the ones that our community, our public are wanting us to address. Mineral in Santa Fe tends to come to the top for a lot of reasons. We have been very successful as another revenue source, of course, is to chase federal grants. And that we've done it at a level, quite honestly, I don't think the city has done in a very, very long time. And so I think that's a great success story, but we cannot meet the obligation of the 20% in order to build those projects. And so if we cannot find at least that 20% obligation, in essence, we have to turn those projects back. We have to turn that grant dollar back. And I'm here to say, and I'm sure Keith would support this, if a city ever turns back federal funds from DRCOG, that organization will remember that for a very, very long time. You do not want to put a city in that position to return those grants. So we really need to find a way to execute those. The other important thing is that the amount of a sales tax increase is only part of the equation. You're going to have to get voter approval to bond, because you do not want to be in a position where you've got, let's say, 5 million or 9 million a year. The transportation projects are so expensive. It would take you multiple years after year to accumulate the funds to execute a construction project. So you must bond in order to be effective. They are linked together. And the other thing that I know our community understands, and certainly the council does, is that no city in this country can address all projects of growth. It's just not fiscally possible. And so I think that's why we have to prioritize. That's why I believe, in my opinion, the Transportation Mobility Board, we need to engage them. This is what we've, in essence, put them in place to do, is to help us sort out that issue and make a recommendation to council. What are the real priorities of transportation?
We have a question from Council Member Elrod.
Thank you. I have 2 questions. Keith, on the grants that we did get from DRCOG, I thought we had gone into them with the having sharpened our pencils to ensure that we could fulfill the match obligation. I know that they were significant, but I think we were very intentional and purposeful to say we can find the money, just in case, right? So I don't know that we ever entered into them not intending to have the money available to fulfill our obligation.
I guess from a simple perspective, if we didn't go into the grant cycle a year and a half ago, we would have had to wait till 2024 or 2025 again, because it's a 4-year cycle. So, I guess we had to ask, and we've always said to them, yes, we'll come up with the match. We'll do what it takes to do that. Because we have to. We've been able to, capture about 41 million in total construction value. So yes, we've always said to them, we're going to do this. And it's always been part of the discussion with our partners as well. So, but we also knew, Tiffany and I have had a lot of conversations about this with Mark and with Brent, my team, the city engineer, about how do we put the pieces together to make that funding solution happen. And we've been able to put together a good portion of it, with the exception of Mineral in Santa Fe. Right now, we've got a gap of about $2.4 million. Tiffany can correct me if I'm wrong. on the local match based on what we've come up with. So right now we're covered for the County Line Road, we're covered for the PL and some of those other ones. But, you know, the Mineral and Santa Fe one is where the gap exists today.
Okay, so it's the 2.4 is the current gap that we're operating under, or is at risk, I guess, of us being able to fulfill?
Yeah, we're doing our best. You know, part of that is it's the dynamics of the grant making landscape is changing, and we have to adapt to that too. We have 2 applications, as you know, out right now for some downtown projects, which we feel like are area pedestrian area. We're going to have some possibilities, and those matches are there too. So, you know, I would venture to say between 2.5 and 2.8 is probably our gap right now in total between now and 2024. That's not the 2021 gap, because the way we've built the projects is design is early, which is, you know, design and right away is the cheap part, building it's the expensive part. So that's how we've scheduled the projects as well.
Yeah, Keith, I'm thinking 2.1 for County Line or Santa Fe and Mineral, but yeah, that's close.
Council, oh, you have another question? Go ahead, sorry.
So I understand that the Transportation Mobility Board has reviewed the priority list, and they actually went through an exercise of creating their own kind of ranking and priority. So has that already been brought forward or considered into that maybe list of projects that fell into the 100 million, or where does that stand? Because I understand that has occurred.
Well, there's 2 parts to this. As part of the Transportation Master Plan project itself, if you look at the appendixes, the projects were already ranked by a scoring system that was developed during the process. So there's a ranking system in there, with the highest priority being safety. And then we asked the TMB to go through an exercise where they thought what was important. Part of that was the fact that they're a brand new board and they needed to work, you know, how they work together. But we have not given them, I spoke with them at the last meeting, that the possibility of council asking them to do some work related to what might be included in a sales tax might be on the horizon, just based on knowing this discussion was coming tonight. And one of the things that's important is that board hasn't been given a box to make those decisions in. In other words, from a council perspective, we think these threads are important, and we would like you to work within those threads. I mean, the other part is, you know, Mark can speak to this as well, is that if we just gave them that task and a list, I'm not sure that they're prepared for that as well at this point, because they're only 18 months old and there's an education process. And so there's going to be a staff component of developing that list based on kind of the themes that council thinks are important, and how we work with the TMB to bring forward a recommendation that council can consider is probably the way we would work that process.
Councilmember Grove.
We're throwing around a lot of numbers, so I want to make sure I understand this. The 90 million projects, Tiffany or Keith, is over the next 5 years, or is that?
No, the 98 million is over the next 15 years.
Okay. So if we were to do a sales tax increase and get 9 million a year, that would put us in a good position. Would it be enough to cover the gaps, or do we have to bond along with it in order to cover the gaps?
I'll just kind of speak to that. Related to construction, as Mark said earlier, trying to dribble out projects over a long time can be problematic. So in circumstances where you're attacking infrastructure, there is oftentimes debt service taken on at the beginning because you have the dedicated revenue stream coming from the tax. And so you can accelerate that. For example, in the Sheridan model, you know, they just got an internal, a couple of years ago, 3 years ago now, passed an internal, you know, sales tax and went out and bonded for $30 million to touch every street. Granted, now they have a bubble that same age, but that's how they attacked it. And, you know, as opposed to dribbling them out year over year, that can limit your ability if you want to take on big projects. But if you're going to take on medium and small, that can be a different approach.
So are you saying that the sales tax plus the bonding in whatever form we want to do it is one solution that would put us whole or in a real good financial position for this fund?
Well,
Correct.
Mark, you can jump on that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd say the short answer is yes. Again, our capital project fund is kind of an interesting mixed bag. So it's not just transportation and growth. We've got buildings in there that's a real issue. We've got a fleet. And so there's kind of complex pieces here that we got to kind of pull apart and try to decide what is it we really are asking the voters to approve. So in some cases, again, just using the 9 million as an example, you may want to bond for a substantial piece of that. And another part of it, quite honestly, maybe the balance per year, you don't need to for building maintenance as an example. Perhaps that's part of it. So there is a piece that I think that we will just have to bond for if this is where the council wants to go, is to address growth projects and the impacts. We have to bond. Now, bonding, quite honestly, financially can be a very advantageous financially. So the cost of bonding, it's like borrowing on your house to some extent, and contrasting that against the actual cost of inflation for construction, not just CPI, but the cost of construction. And so many times when you go through that analysis, you'll find it is actually cheaper in the long run to bond up front, as opposed to saving your money over time and doing it on a cash basis. And so in the current environment we see today, that is very true. As we all know, the cost of borrowing right now is pretty cheap. And so I think our timing could be really to our community's advantage if we were allowed this opportunity.
Okay, so in essence, the sales tax plus what percentage we bond really kind of fixes the problem. And that's the strategy you're recommending.
That's correct.
Thank you. Thank you.
Before we go to Councilmember Driscoll, if we go to our city attorney.
Yeah, I was also going to mention, as part of the sales tax measure, you would probably see a sunsetting of that as well. So that goes to the reason that you would probably want to do the bond as well, so that you can get this done quickly. And, as Mark and Keith spoke to.
Councilmember Driscoll.
Yeah, can I suggest that we, again, this is a parking lot issue. I think we can get really deep in the weeds on this and to stay on point and continue working through the budget and not get into the weeds so much.
Yeah, we just allocated ourselves a little bit of time on this. So we have about maybe 20 more minutes.
I mean, do we need to, isn't that what a study session's for?
That's what our parking lot session will be for.
Yes.
For getting into it and making a final decision on it. Okay. Councilmember Elrod.
I just want to get some clarity on the number as well. Two things. So one, the 98 million, is that just for transportation projects, or does that also include other types of capital projects like buildings and things like that?
It does include the others, yes. Buildings, information technology, but as I mentioned, there's a number of more needs that once we're able to really assess it and what direction we're headed, I'm certain that this number is going to be lower than what we truly need.
And then the second question that I have, when we look at transportation type projects, there are certain projects just based on what they are, let's say build capacity building. So that means bigger roads, et cetera. There's a higher cost of maintenance and operation versus other projects maybe, I don't know what, but may actually reduce our maintenance and operation. So, how are we, or do we have a sense of, for every dollar that we have to invest in capital, we have to we can come in neutral maintenance, so the 3 million still supports that, or are we going to have to look to increase that as well, or hopefully decrease it in some cases?
Actually, excellent question. And I think that many cities who try to take this on may have as part of the bond measure, once the debt is retired on the capital, is to retain a piece of the sales tax for maintenance purposes. So again, it all depends on what you're building. So it's an excellent question. That's why you got to identify early on, what is it you're really trying to accomplish here in order to understand the impacts to maintenance?
Yes, because my concern there, right, is how do we maintain what we built, right? That becomes the bigger liability to us. That a short-term measure does not solve for. That is exactly where we're seeing ourselves now with the $3 million that we're pulling from general fund. So that's a very important element. Please, let's be sure that we bring that back. And I know you will. I just wanted to.
Absolutely.
That.
Great. All right. The comment I want to add to this is that a sales tax would be helpful. It's not going to necessarily solve anything, because I was just going through the CAFR in our highway use taxes has been relatively flat, but now it's projected that they're going to probably start going down. And I think that would also be true for our building tax that we have too. Would that be correct, Mark? Is that at this point we can anticipate that HUTF is going to go down and the building use tax is not going to increase?
I think it's fair to say clearly HUTF is going to be flat here and perhaps even go down. And it's been a struggle for decades. I think it's the building use tax is so volatile, it's really hard to understand where that's going. Based on our forecast for the economy, it's likely to go down. All of this is just complicating the limited revenue we have in the capital project fund. And that's why we're at this moment in time. That's why I'm making the suggestion, this recommendation to council right now, is because of this very issue.
All right. Let's maybe take maybe one or two more questions, and then we can probably just wrap it up for the night, because I think people are starting to get a little numbered crazy here. Council Member Elrod, go ahead.
Never number crazy for me. Well, I'm going to switch. I think I'm trying to switch topic a little bit. So moving away from the capital needs for transportation. I was a little surprised to hear, I might have heard this before, but that we have 25 buildings. Are there any plans to divest ourselves of those 25 buildings? Are they needed? So what's our plan with 25 buildings, and who's using them, and how do we maybe look at what that plan is long term?
So I'll be happy to answer that question. You know, actually, we divested a huge chunk of our square footage with the fire department. And I've nothing against fire departments, but they are high maintenance customers. That's kind of all I can tell you. You know, like we've talked about, we're still in the process of getting you a facilities master plan. Last year, we did an assessment of all the facilities. We have a design team working on long-term space needs in Bellevue that covers public works and some police needs and some other things, as well as, you know, Littleton Center. So it's our intent to have, you know, like we have in the other infrastructure areas, that question answered here in the next probably 4 or 5 months. But this council chamber thing is kind of throwing us a little bit on a wrench for our schedule, since all our resources are with that now. But yeah, we have to develop that plan as well. And that's something that never existed here before. And we're in the process of getting there.
And so specifically for Geneva Lodge, you know, why at this time do we want to take that over? You know, like I've heard, let's say that's going to cost us a lot of money to refurbish, you know, why not just let somebody else come in with another lease and let them own it until, you know, or lease it out until we have a facilities master plan and we have a strategy and plan for that, as opposed to kind of start bringing some of those back in when.
So
maybe we don't need to right now, I guess is the point.
Yeah. So at Geneva Lodge, we still take care of the outside regardless of the lease. And that lease is a zero revenue lease to the city and has been for 2 decades. And the term of the current lease is ending now. So that's why we made a decision to move forward with that. We obviously are searching for grant funds to help us, because it's a historical building, much like we've done with the courthouse or Bemis House. So that's part of our game plan over there. That also addresses the fact that, you know, as we've talked about, the main project that we are going to be attacking at Littleton Center is a space and capacity issue. And bringing Geneva Lodge back into the portfolio allows us to utilize existing space as opposed to trying to build new space to address some of the capacity issues that have existed for the last decade, at least in Littleton Center. So that's part of its timing, part of its need, and it's a combination of those two things. And also we're going to try and find grant funds to help us out. You know, we got about 90,000 in exterior work that has to be done. And then we have some life safety work, and we have to improve the ADA accessibility. That's kind of what's on the screen to allow that building to be successfully used for our own operations.
Mark, I think at this point, I'd kind of like to wrap up this section of the capital fund. You know, we're approaching 9 o'clock. We need a few more minutes just to wrap up.
No problem, Mayor.
Is that okay?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, on the parking lot, the items that I was able to record was the LICR museum charge to enter, artwork for the firefighters, and capital funds.
That's correct. That matches up with my notes anyways.
All right, cool. All right. I think that what we added tonight are a whole nother night itself, let alone the ones that we added last night.
Yes, we have a lot of work to do. So the third night, probably another long night.
It's going to be another long night. And a possibility we may have to add even another night to it.
It's possible.
Yeah. And when do we have to have this budget actually voted in first reading, second reading?
Tiffany?
Yep. First reading is on October 6th, and then second reading is whatever 2 weeks is later.
All right. Whatever that. You're in accounting. It'd be 14 more days, okay?
October 20th.
There we go. Thank you.
I will caution you if there are a number of changes after the September 24th session. There might be a tight timeline just to get the packet completed. So just so you're aware.
Okay. All righty. So with that, City Manager, did you have any other reports?
I do not, Mayor. That's it for me this evening. Appreciate it.
Great. Well, thank you. Good job to you and your staff on all of this. And City Attorney.
You know, Mark took up all my time with his last comment, so nothing tonight. Maybe
I
next
got
time.
it. Well, I'm not going to ask Keith or the chief if they have anything else to add tonight. Tiffany, once again, thank you very much. Good job, staff. Good job, staff. All right. With that, it is 8:52, and if we have Karina, you have your hand up.
So some of the funds we did not go through are the enterprise funds, the open space funds. Is that planned for September 24th as well?
Correct.
It is, yes. And I don't think it'll take a lot of our time that evening. I think we can get through those pretty quickly.
Great. All right. All right. Anything else, Council? I see no hands. It is 8:53, and we are adjourned. Have a good night.
Thank you.
See you Tuesday.